One man, 11 seasons, 9 teams, and one All-Star selection? He's the type of name that comes up in an obscure NBA trivia question. A mobile big man with some creativity in the post, a line drive hook shot, and a solid handle for a player his size. But he carved out his role with his relentless high-energy play when going for rebounds and loose balls. But as a player who averaged less than an assist per game for his career, you knew when he got the ball, he was likely taking a shot. Chris Gatling is in the running for the NBA's most forgotten All-Star title, and it's understandable, as a career bench player with a couple seasons as an above-average sixth man. But he almost never made it to an NBA court, as he underwent 2 major brain surgeries before his 22nd birthday. And when he did get there, he was constantly stuck behind high draft picks at his position. And while you can easily classify him as a player with inflated stats due to playing on bad teams, you can also classify him as an NBA All-Star, which is an exclusive distinction. And while he may have bounced around teams throughout his career, it was never due to him as an issue. It was just a prime example of the business of basketball and making salaries match. But at the end of the day, there's always a reason to talk about the career of an All-Star. And like it or not, Chris Gatling fits that criteria. Let's jog your memory. A New Jersey native, Chris Gatling was a local star at Elizabeth High School, already being recruited by major D1 programs. But in the spring of 1985, he almost lost his basketball future, as while he was cleaning the windshield of a van, he slipped and hit his head on the pavement, which led to him developing a blood clot in his brain and ultimately spending 2.5 weeks in a coma. And when he did wake up, he was suffering from paralysis and slurred speech. But Gatling fought back, and by his 1986 senior season, he would lead Elizabeth to the state title and would be named New Jersey's Player of the Year. And when it came time for college, Gatling would commit to the University of Pittsburgh. However, Gatling would never suit up for the Panthers, as he was ineligible during his 87 freshman season due to failing to adhere to the Prop 48 requirements, which would eventually lead to him transferring to Old Dominion. Yet again, he would have to sit out for a year because of the transfer. So after graduating high school in 1986, Gatling's first college game didn't come until late 1988. But the 21-year-old sophomore was worth the wait for the Monarchs, as Gatling became one of the Sun Belt Conference's most efficient players during his 3 years. In the 89 season, he would lead the team in both scoring and rebounding, and was top 3 in the conference in both categories, while shooting over 61% from the field, and also averaging over a steal and 2 blocks per game, as he was given first-team All-Sun Belt honors for a 15 and 13 Monarchs team. But throughout all of this, he was suffering from constant headaches and slurred speech. So over the summer, he would get a steel plate implanted in his head to help minimize these occurrences. But it didn't affect him on the court, as Gatling came back as a junior to average a double-double, again as the team's leading rebounder and one of 2 players to average at least 20 points, again finishing top 3 in the conference in both categories, while shooting 58% from the field and averaging nearly 2 steals and 2 blocks per game. As on top of being named first team all-conference, he would also be voted Conference Player of the Year, this time for a Monarchs team who finished at 14 and 14. Gatling's senior season was his best, as he led the team in scoring while pulling down a career-high 11.1 rebounds per game, once again finishing top 3 in the conference in both categories, all while he was scoring at a conference-leading 62% shooting. And again on the defensive end, he was doing everything, averaging nearly 2 steals and a conference-leading 2.7 blocks, leading to his 3rd consecutive first-team all-conference selection and a repeat as Sun Belt Player of the Year. And Gatling would even lead the team to the conference tournament finals, where they would lose to South Alabama. And with a 14 and 18 record, they again missed out on the tournament, as Gatling had never made the postseason during his college career. But he had done enough to become a first-round pick in the 1991 NBA Draft. Gatling was the first selection by the Golden State Warriors, 16th overall, with the 17th pick also coming from Golden State, when they selected Victor Alexander. And although Golden State had been one of the league's top offenses last year, they lacked inside scoring and rebounding. So a high-efficiency, maximum-effort power forward like Gatling, who also had the mobility to run in Don Nelson's fast-paced offense, seemed like an ideal pick to play alongside the Warriors' Run TMC trio of Tim Hardaway, Mitch Richmond, and Chris Mullin. But Gatling would quickly become overlooked among the Warriors' rookies, as just days before the 92 season started, Nelson sent Richmond to the Kings, and in return received 3rd overall pick Billy Owens, who also played power forward, so any chance Gatling had to start was gone. So Gatling spent his rookie year in a modest bench role, getting about 11 minutes per game, and even though his numbers didn't look like anything crazy, he was efficient, and his per 36 numbers showed how much production he could potentially give you. And out of his 12 games in double-figure scoring, he shot below 66% in just 2 of them, and would record 1 double-double on the year. Even with the loss of Richmond, the Warriors were having an improved season, and were the league's highest-scoring team, as they would finish with a 55-27 record to get them a first-round matchup with Seattle. Gatling had seen his minutes go way up over the final month of the season, so this playoff series would also see him play a large role, and he would deliver, as in a Game 1 loss, he went for 12 points on 5 of 7 shooting, while adding 7 rebounds and 3 blocks. Then after an 8-point Game 2, the series was tied going to Seattle. Gatling came out on the road with 16 points, while making all 7 of his shots from the field, and adding 2 steals and 2 blocks. But the Warriors fell behind 2-1. Then even though Gatling recorded a 14-point, 12-rebound double-double in Game 4, Shawn Kemp was handing out posters this game, and after putting Alton Lister on one of his most famous posters midway through the second quarter, he would come back a few minutes later and make Gatling his next victim.
McMillan with the quick hand, swatted away by Gatling. Oh, brother! Shawn Kemp plus the foul!
But Gatling knew the risk he was taking trying to block Kemp, and Kemp seemed like he respected it, as the two dapped up after the dunk. But this game also ended in a Sonics win, as they eliminated the Warriors, with Gatling's rookie year ending with him averaging about 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and half a steal per game. The Warriors added Alabama's Latrell Sprewell through the draft, but the team was hit bad with the injury bug this season, as Mullin missed nearly half the year, and star sixth man Sarunas Marciulionis appeared in just 30 games. But Gatling saw his minutes increase due to an injury to Billy Owens, as he would deal with knee issues all season and play in just 37 games. So now Gatling was getting 6.5 more minutes per night, as he would up his numbers across the board, hitting 32 games in double figures, and going for a season-high 29 points in a March 1st defeat of Philly. And over the course of the season, he started 11 games, and in those starts, his numbers were even better. So although Gatling was known as an energy guy who came off the bench to jumpstart the team with his hustle and hard work, he was showing that he had the capability to handle bigger minutes. Unfortunately, with the Warriors dealing with so many big injuries, they just couldn't string together too many wins, as they fell to 34-48 in 93 and missed the playoffs. As Gatling's second season ended, with him averaging about 9.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and half a steal per game. Gatling would see his minutes drop slightly in the 94 season, yet it was not due to anything he had done wrong. It was just that he kept getting pushed further down the depth chart, as Owens came back to have a much healthier season, and the Warriors had pulled off a draft day trade to acquire first overall pick Chris Webber. And after so many frontcourt injuries last year, this season it was the backcourt who were struck with injuries, and bad ones at that, as during the offseason, it was first announced that Marciulionis had torn his ACL and would miss the season. Then about a month later, Hardaway tore his ACL in practice, as he would also be out for the year. But the top frontcourt players remained relatively healthy, and Gatling can likely thank his versatility for why he was still able to get solid minutes, as he had the size and athleticism to play his natural power forward or the center position. But at his size, he still possessed an ability to handle the ball and had a little range on his shot, so Nelson was even able to play him at the 3 a little bit. So Gatling would find minutes, as he would hit 30 games in double figures and record 6 double-doubles. And he would find himself in the starting lineup over the final month of the season, as he would give the team improved production on nearly 60% shooting, as the Warriors went 9-3 in this time, which included an 8-game win streak, as they ended the season with a 50-32 record and made a return to the playoffs. The first round brought Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns, and in Game 1 as a starter, Gatling put up 10 points, but struggled with foul trouble, playing just 19 minutes as the Warriors lost. He was back on the bench for Game 2, as he would get 16 minutes and give the team 6 rebounds and 8 points. But again, fouls were a problem, and the Warriors fell behind 0-2. Then another 8-point performance along with 8 rebounds off the bench in Game 3 wouldn't do much when Barkley decided to go for 56 points, as the Suns completed the sweep, with Gatling's year seeing him average about 8 points, 5 rebounds, and half a steal per game. But in year 4, Gatling would throw on a headband, get some more minutes, and rarely miss a shot. Days before the season started, Owens was shipped to Miami for big man Ronnie Cycli, yet injuries would limit Cycli to just 36 games. Then a couple weeks into the season, the Warriors traded an unhappy Chris Webber to the Washington Bullets for a package headlined by Tom Gugliotta. Yet Gugliotta would last just 40 games before being traded to Minnesota at the deadline for Donyell Marshall. And with Mullin managing just 25 games of his own, the frontcourt was pretty depleted. And that didn't exclude Gatling, as an early January hand injury would keep him out for a few weeks, and overall he would miss 24 games this year. Gatling would appear in 36 of the team's first 45 games, starting 8 of them and putting up improved numbers. But over the All-Star break, with the Warriors sitting at 14-31, Nelson would step down as head coach, and Bob Lanier would take his place. And under Lanier, Gatling would start in 14 of his final 22 games and put up great numbers in that time, as he even dropped at least 20 points in each of his first 4 games post All-Star break, with 3 of those games seeing him record double-doubles. And overall, Gatling's career-high 63.3% shooting this season would lead the league. And with Gatling wearing a headband more frequently, he would eventually reveal that he originally put it on as a joke, to act like the Trailblazers' Cliff Robinson. But he started playing so well that his teammates wouldn't let him take it off. But Gatling would miss the final 11 games of the season for a Warriors team who finished with a 26-56 record, and missed the playoffs, as Gatling's great year ended with him averaging about 13.5 points, 7.5 rebounds, and half a steal per game. The Warriors would bring in Rick Adelman for the 96 season, but they had also brought in the first overall pick in power forward Joe Smith. So once again, Gatling was kept out of the starting lineup by a highly touted big man, and with Cycli playing a healthier season, Gatling saw a decline in his minutes. But although his numbers were down, the production was still there, and he was still one of the league's top bench players. But the Warriors were a much different looking team than when Gatling first arrived there 5 years earlier. And when the trade deadline rolled around, they continued making changes. A blockbuster trade would see Hardaway sent to the Miami Heat, with Gatling being included in the deal as filler, and due to Miami wanting his expiring contract. So it was no secret that Gatling was just a rental for the Heat, but he still joined a Heat team who now featured one of the league's better inside-outside duos in Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning. And although Gatling still wasn't able to crack the starting lineup, he received some of the highest minutes of his career over his final 24 games in a Heat uniform, acting as the team's 6th man and giving them great production, as this season would see him finish with the league's 2nd highest field goal percentage. And overall, he would finish top 10 in 6th man of the year voting for the 2nd consecutive season. And while Miami wasn't great, they still finished above 500, as their 42-40 record would get them the East's final playoff spot and a matchup with Chicago. Gatling would have 10 points in Game 1, but over his next 2, he would uncharacteristically shoot just 2 of 14 from the field. And this series would go as expected, as the Bulls made quick work of the Heat in a 3-game sweep, with Gatling's overall season ending with him averaging about 11 points, 6 rebounds, and half a steal per game. And after the Heat opted not to re-sign Gatling, he would manage to get himself a lucrative deal in free agency. In mid-July, Gatling agreed to a 5-year, $21 million deal with the Dallas Mavericks, making him their highest paid free agent signing in team history at the time, as the Mavs needed a high-efficiency scorer after finishing dead last in team field goal percentage last year, as it seemed like they were happy to welcome the man who was known as the Energizer, a nickname Gatling fully embraced with multiple Energizer bunny tattoos. And when the season began, the Mavs had one of the league's best young cores, with Jason Kidd, Jamal Mashburn, and Jim Jackson. Yet by the trade deadline, they had all been shipped away, as this season was filled with roster change for the Mavs. But even with his big deal, Gatling was still coming off the bench, as he seemed destined to be a career 6th man. But there's nothing wrong with that, as his 27.1 minutes per game were a then career high. But it's his numbers that were more impressive, as he was putting up career highs across the board, with his 19 points per game leading the team by a large margin. Gatling had some great moments over the first half of the season, as in the season opener versus Denver, he scored the game-winning layup. And with Dallas, he would record 40 games in double figures and 16 double-doubles, with one of the best games of his career coming in a November 16th loss to Utah. when he pulled down a career-high 20 rebounds while adding 23 points. And leading up to the All-Star game, a lot of the players who had made the original vote were being ruled out due to injury. And eventually Gatling got a call and was offered the replacement spot for an injured Clyde Drexler, as he would make his All-Star debut in year 6, and was throwing up a shot whenever he touched the ball, as he would take 8 shots in 12 minutes. But he would make one of them, as he could say he scored in the All-Star game. But then after playing just 2 games for Dallas post-All-Star break, Gatling was included in a huge package sent to New Jersey, as new Mavs GM Don Nelson would say that moves had to be made due to bad attitudes in the locker room, but at least Gatling was heading home. But Gatling's homecoming was not what he was expecting, as after going for a double-double in his first game with the team, then dropping 21 points the next night, he would play just one more game before being sidelined with an ear infection. But it didn't end here, as while he was recovering, he noticed a numbness in his face, which eventually turned into full-on facial paralysis due to nerve damage, as he would never suit up again this season, yet would still finish top 3 in 6th Man of the Year voting, on a Nets team who finished at 26-56 and missed the playoffs, as Gatling's shortened All-Star season ended with him averaging about 19 points, 8 rebounds, and 1 steal per game. The 98 season would be more of a homecoming for Gatling. The Nets looked to be an up-and-coming team with point guard Sam Cassell, who had come over with Gatling from Dallas, as well as the second-year Kerry Kittles, and this year's second overall pick, Keith Van Horn. But Gatling remained in his high-energy bench role, acting as relief for both Van Horn and big man Jason Williams. But to begin the season, Gatling was actually starting, and while his numbers were good over his first 12 games, he was shooting below 43% and averaging over 3 fouls per game, so he was shifted back to his 6th man role. But a couple weeks later, he went down with a stress fracture in his leg, as he would miss about a month and a half. When he returned, he was again in his bench role, but saw a minutes increase over his final 11 games of the year, after Williams was sidelined with a broken thumb, as Gatling would produce well in that time, especially on the boards, and the Nets would go 7-4, which would help them grab the final playoff spot in the East to take on the Bulls in round 1. As a starter in Game 1, Gatling had the best playoff game of his career, as he went for 24 points on 10 of 18 shooting, while adding 2 blocks and a steal, with 13 of his points coming in the 4th quarter alone, as the Nets were almost able to come back from a double-digit 4th quarter deficit, but would eventually lose by 3. Then come Game 2, Gatling was again coming off the bench, and would turn in a much more modest 4-point performance in another loss. Then although he hadn't improved 18 points in Game 3, the Bulls got the win to wrap up the series, as Gatling's season had ended with him averaging about 11.5 points, 6 rebounds, and a steal per game. However, even though Gatling had been a productive player throughout his career, the rest of his years would see him turn into one of the league's most well-traveled players. Gatling was in net to begin the lockout-shortened 99 season, but after 18 games, at well below his usual level of production, he was again included in a trade, this time a 3-team deal that brought the Nets Stephon Marbury and sent Gatling and Cassell to the Milwaukee Bucks to team up with Ray Allen and Glenn Robinson. The Bucks were 12-5 at the time of the trade, but they didn't have huge plans for Gatling, as although his minutes saw a slight increase and he produced more efficiently, he just wasn't a huge part of the offense. So Gatling would appear in 30 games for the Bucks, and post-trade the Bucks would win 16 more games to finish at 28-22 and get a first-round matchup with Indiana. But Gatling would barely see the court, going scoreless in his first 2 games before logging a DNP in Game 3, as the Bucks were swept, with Gatling's overall season seeing him average about 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and half an assist per game. But shortly after the season, Gatling was on the move again. The Bucks would send Gatling to the Orlando Magic in mid-August, as the soon-to-be 32-year-old joined a young Magic team with a first-year head coach in Doc Rivers. Gatling would reassume his 6th man role, as he was getting about 23 minutes per game off the bench, as his numbers returned to the level of production that was more characteristic of him. Yet he only was shooting about 45%, and while this is solid, it was a drop-off from a guy who used to be among the league's best when it came to field goal percentage. But as he was a player that relied a lot on being quicker and more athletic to get his easy buckets when he was younger, he had lost a step over the years, and was starting to rely more on the post fade and even the long-range shot, as he was averaging a 3-point attempt every 2 games. And in early February, after 45 games, he was again on the move, as he was included in a package sent to Denver. And in Denver, his production remained relatively similar to the first half of the year in Orlando, with his slight dip being attributable to him receiving about 4 less minutes. But his three-point attempts just kept rising, as over his final 40 games with Denver, he attempted 47 three-pointers, making 11 of them. And while Denver was a below-average team who would finish at 35-47 and miss the playoffs, Gatling would lead the league in games played, as between Orlando and Denver, he took the court 85 times this season, and overall averaged about 12 points, 6 rebounds, and a steal per game. But another trade would see Gatling end up in Cleveland, where he would have the last good season of his career. Gatling joined a Cavs team in transition, with guys like point guard Andre Miller and forward Clarence Weatherspoon acting as their top players this year, with Gatling again taking on a sixth-man role, and he relied even more on the outside shot this season, attempting a career-high 1.2 per game. Yet he would make them at a respectable rate, going 30.4% from beyond the arc. And overall, he would manage 50 games in double figures this year, with 4 double-doubles, with his best game coming in a January 10th loss to Sacramento, which saw Gatling go for a career-high 38 points on 17 of 25 shooting, with 28 of those points coming in the first half alone. And while Gatling had shown that he can still give you good minutes, the Cavs were desperate to get good minutes from anyone, with one of the league's worst offenses, which would eventually lead to them finishing with a 30-52 record and missing the playoffs, as Gatling's year had ended with him averaging about 11.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and half a steal per game. Yet again, Gatling had been included in a trade, this time days before the start of the 0-2 season, as he made a return to the Miami Heat. But on a deeper and more established Heat team, Gatling saw a much smaller role, as in 54 games, he would receive about 15 minutes a night, and would miss time on multiple occasions due to concussions, which were more worrisome due to Gatling's history of head injuries. And the Heat as a whole took a step back from a 50-win campaign last year, as they would finish at 36-46 and miss the playoffs, as Gatling's year had ended with him averaging about 6.5 points, 4 rebounds, and half a steal per game. The Heat would waive Gatling in the offseason, and while he would never appear in another NBA game, he would go to Russia and sign with CSKA Moscow for the 0-3 season, yet would appear in just 12 games for the team before returning to the US for personal reasons, and eventually being transferred to the Italian team, Scavallini. Unfortunately, in his years after basketball, Gatling had not managed his money well, and when it ran out, he turned to taking other people's money, as in 2017 he was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for a variety of fraud and theft-related charges. So while Gatling didn't fly under the radar during his post-basketball activities, that's exactly what he did during his playing days. A solid producer on the offensive end who didn't get a ton of recognition as a high-efficiency player, with an endless motor in his early years. And even though he's a former NBA All-Star, he's a name most people wouldn't recognize. And while his per 36 numbers are just speculation, they do indicate that he could have been an exceptionally productive player if given a true chance. But that never really happened. But it makes sense, as he was a ball stopper on offense, and in spending his earliest years on a Warriors team who always wanted to push the pace, that just doesn't mesh well. And even though he had some good production for a few teams after that, those teams rarely did much winning. But Chris Gatling was known as the Energizer for a reason, and although he was well-traveled, teams always had a place for him, because he left it all out on the court. But that's it for today's episode on Chris Gatling. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out these 2 videos on a couple of his Warriors teammates. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.